So, as I was writing my piece on Gojo and going over the first episode of the hidden inventory as is tradition, I caught myself going down the rabbit hole and fangirling about more and more things. Until I realised I was yapping for 5 minutes straight, I figured why not just make a separate video? This way I can also avoid overwhelming you guys, because Gojo is a Russian nesting doll of philosophy, so there's no need to add more to that. So this will be a half stream of consciousness, half video essay where I talk about how awesome the first part of a hidden inventory is. I will nerd out about the visual storytelling and stuff you may or may not have caught. Lastly, I want to briefly introduce what I believe each character represents. Just a little sneak peek of what I'll cover in more depth in their individual analysis videos. Personally, I think it makes way more sense when you see the full picture first, and then dive into each one separately. And if you are going to watch it next week at the movie theatre, I hope that this video will help you see things from a new perspective. Are you ready? Let's begin. There are 2 things you need to familiarise yourself with right off the bat. First, a fractal is a pattern that repeats itself at different scales. And there's such a thing in storytelling, according to author Connor Judson Garrett. Fractal storytelling weaves interconnected stories, creating a self-repeating pattern that spans from the microcosm of a short story to the vast macrocosm of a shared universe. This is something Akutama uses a lot. I gave an example on my Yuji video with the first chapter and how it established the main characters and their personalities, the theme and the plot within the school, an environment familiar with most, if not all, readers, and then branched out to their world. The hidden inventory does something similar, which we will break down in a second. The second thing is that I'm going to invoke a little hear me out moment and say that MeiMei and Utahime are meant to give you a vague sense of deja vu for Gojo and Geto. In this scene, they're acting like mirrors. I previously gave an example with the Utahime situation, where it is very common for mangakas to bring characters as a visual representation of the internal or raw feelings the characters might be experiencing, as a way of showing you, not telling you. MeiMei repeatedly puts her interests first, just like Gojo, when Nanami said that he never cared about keeping sorcery going or protecting people. He was in the game because he got a kick out of it in chapter 236, Hybera saying that everyone agreed, but no one could bring themselves to say anything. They both carry that same air of superiority, that cool, calm, almost inhuman sense to them. Meanwhile, Utahime has that righteous, eager-to-help energy that Geto used to have. There are certain things that are made more apparent in the anime, but the foundation is already there in the manga. I know it might sound like a reach right now, but trust the process. Think of this part as learning the anatomy before the physiology. Now that we have established the tools used, how about we go into specifics? The manga opens with Utahime asking MeiMei how far the whole way goes. MeiMei gives an estimate and is immediately positioned as the more knowledgeable one. She explains that the curse isn't creating a barrier that creates a loop in the mansion, per se. It's overlapping space on itself as they move forward. Which is exactly Geto's problem. As he continues to eat curses, he keeps piling up negative energy. And the more he absorbs, the more it starts to consume him from the inside out. Utahime looks unsure. She guesses that maybe it's just a massive barrier, but MeiMei says that it is unlikely. Utahime then suggests to split up and move unpredictably. MeiMei agrees, which should ring some bells as it is precisely what happened at the end of the arc. Before they can even try anything, however, Gojo obliterates the mansion with his overwhelming power. And that moment ties perfectly into what Gojo asks Yaga at the end of Hidden Inventory. Am I strong? And Yaga replies, yes, and you're full of yourself too. Tying back to the I am here to save you. And the conversation that happened right after the mansion fell apart. What is really evident is that there was always a gap between them from the beginning, a gap in effort. You can both be straight-A students, but there's a difference between the one who gets there through sweat and tears, studying 5 hours a day, and the one who barely studies because it just makes sense to them. That's the invisible gap. And you can even see it visually in that panel where the pairs are separated. Gojo and MeiMei above, Utahime and Geto below. Gojo is so powerful that most curses can't even touch him. Killing them is like stepping on ants. He could spend his whole life just wiping them out as they show up. But for Suguru, that cycle became increasingly unbearable. Also keep in mind, Geto genuinely believes that curse users have no other choice but to be sorcerers. But we'll get into that when we talk about the anime, so just put a pin in it. The last thing I want to mention before we move on is the conversation that happened after the mansion got destroyed. With Gojo asking Utahime if she was crying, and she gets annoyed, saying no, and MeiMei says, If I were to cry, would you console me? Gojo responds by saying that she is too strong. She wouldn't cry. Which, by the way, if in chapter 236 they made Gojo shed a tear of happiness, that would be so good. Or maybe snow just melting off his face that made it look like he was not crying, but he is. Also, a parallel of the advice Geto gives to respect your elders, and how he indirectly insults Utahime by implying she is the weak one, which he later internalized by being defeated by Toji, despite being told by Yuki that Toji was an exception. And when Gojo makes that offhand comment, notice what Geto says. Don't swallow it, we'll absorb it later, which is so good, because that's exactly what ends up happening. He swallows Gojo's curse, the idea that for the strong, protecting the weak is bothersome, and that he's saying it so he can feel better about himself. And how do we know this hits him unconsciously? Gege draws a crying eye in the background while obscuring it in Geto himself, which means what was said hurt him. As Gojo got stronger, the gap between him and Geto widened, until there was no longer a step for Geto to catch up on, or even ask for help. I hope I did a good job at highlighting how using characters outside the main cast who vaguely resemble them creates an unconscious reenactment, a self-contained echo of the story. The manga does a good job of giving you the gist, but in my opinion, the anime makes this dynamic from subtly hinted at to painfully clear by all the stuff added at the beginning. One of the benefits of working on an adaptation versus an original work is that you already have the foundation laid out for you, and your job is to ask what did the author meant by this and being capable of sort of filling in the gaps. And it definitely helps when your work is assigned to almost inhumanly talented individuals in the industry, such as scriptwriter Seko and directors Goshozono and Park. One of my favourite things about the series is how well the anime and manga complement each other. You can feel the collaboration between mediums, trying to make the story the best it can be, because I think the anime took this chapter from good to masterpiece level by adding a lot of context and making a couple of changes to make their mirror crystal clear. Now let's talk about the additions. The very first scene is Geto walking down a dark alley, talking about the circle he is trapped on when he decided to become a sorcerer, exercise and absorb. He explains how no one understands the taste of a curse. Yet, even with full awareness of the darkness humans are capable of manifesting, he's still committed to saving them. It is that circle versus stack on dynamic the manga talks about. When we do certain things, we see them as a circle. What goes unnoticed is the discontent that piles up, thinking that we are used to it. Like, if you work in customer service and you get yelled at every day, at a certain point you think you're used to it, but your mind is still keeping the score. The same loop we also show inside the mansion. The scene where Utahime is opening the doors. That's meant to represent how Geto watches the horrors of humanity he spoke about earlier in the episode. And it lets us know deep down he's a bit afraid. After all, he is still a teenager. Then we jump to the car ride scene. There's that conversation between Mei-Mei and Utahime. Notice how neither of them is driving and reinforcing the idea that they're not in control of the situation. We get the backstory of the mansion's ex-occupants, a business president who ran a chain of barbecue restaurants. The company took a massive hit during a mad cow disease outbreak, which left him deep in debt, and he and his family ended up committing suicide. Since then, the place has become a haunted house. Rumours spread, which made the curse grow stronger, and that meant more work for sorcerers. Utahime ends the scene by mentioning 3 grade kids who disappeared on their way home, probably becoming victims just for getting too close. And here, it was the moment I decided this needed to be a separate video because this is just so genius. These 2 were on a job, got hit with a devastating loss, Rico dying at the hands of someone infected by society, Toji, the mad cow. Just kidding, kinda. Mad cow disease is a fatal brain disease in cows caused by a prion, a misfolded protein that corrupts other proteins, leading to cell death. There's no cure, and it spreads easily through consumption, which sounds a lot like unresolved trauma works. The Zenin family was Toji's prion, infecting him with resentment toward all sorcerers and turning him into the sorcerer killer, which then infected Geto and turned him into the non-sorcerer killer. Isn't that sick? It is moments like this that make me so self-conscious of saying, I want to be a scriptwriter or a director, because I look at this and I am like, there are people like this in this world. But with just a couple of lines, they can explain what you spent chapters saying. If I was Akutami Sensei and I was pitched that mad cow analogy, I would have burst into tears that just perfectly encapsulates the root cause of the entire arc. What a way to feel seen. Because if Toji hadn't felt the need to prove himself, to reject the rejection of who he was, Riko's death could have been prevented. Which means Geto's spiral could have been prevented. And then, well, there'd be no Jujutsu Kaisen, would there? But if none of it had happened, then nothing would have changed. Another parallel I want to point out is how Utahime says they need to cut the problem from the roots as soon as possible, which is Geto's future radical approach, killing humans because he believes they are the root of all curses. And I love how the anime uses a literal warning sign in the scene too, as if to say, this approach is dangerous because there is not a single root to cut, unfortunately. Also, remember when I said that the difference between Utahime and MeiMei was more evident in the anime? There are so many subtle scenes that reinforce that dynamic of superiority, like MeiMei throwing the flashlight and saying, I don't need that, but you do. Their hesitation when asked to go in and do the search all on their own, mirroring how Geto ends up going on missions solo. And inside the mansion, I love that they added MeiMei saying, you got startled all on your own, which is precisely what happened in that scene. You know the one, the breakup scene. The anime also makes the cyclical theme way more explicit, Utahime being the one to voice the ideas, and MeiMei is the one saying close 90 points. Then she focuses on the remaining 10. She then suggested going the opposite way, but the only person we see running is Utahime. And then the mansion collapses, which, again, is brilliant foreshadowing, because that's what ends up happening, Gojo and Geto as they go their separate ways. Which brings us to the big question, what exactly are Gojo and Geto meant to represent? I shall invoke my second Hear Me Out card and say that they represent the collective mind. As a collective society, we have two halves, the conscious side and the unconscious side. The collective consciousness represented by Gojo embodies Jujutsu society's shared articulated beliefs and the societal structures people consciously uphold. In Jujutsu Kaisen, curse energy is power, and Gojo is absolute power. He's the collective ideal. Think of people like Kim Kardashian, Marilyn Monroe, or every K-pop idol. They're collective ideals, beauty/sex symbols that embody what society consciously uplifts and aspires to. And like the saying goes, as above, so below. By creating such unrealistic ideals, we also define those who don't fit. Some will chase it so they don't get left behind, some won't. Either way, you'll still be measured against it. Even though most people don't match the ideal, so in theory, it should feel silly even to have one. We still do. It creates this little feedback loop. If I don't fit this standard, if I don't look fit like this, or if I don't have a double eyelid, if my nose doesn't look like this, then I'm not attractive. Even when people tell you otherwise. Even when you tell yourself otherwise, the loop still hits. Or in Geto's case, I'm not as strong as Satoru Gojo, so I'm not the strongest. That's where the collective unconscious comes in. It's the hidden fears, the suppressed negativity, and the shadow aspects of humanity that manifest as curses. Geto represents that ever-growing resentment, the emotional waste product of the system. If we stick with the beauty analogy, the collective unconscious would be all the insecurity, body dysmorphia, disordered eating, and self-hatred that arise from trying and failing to meet those conscious ideals. Not to mention the way we unconsciously judge others who also don't meet them. These are the darker, often unacknowledged consequences of upholding an ideal. Geto is constantly chasing the idea of being strong enough to keep up with Gojo. He keeps absorbing curses to try and match that power, and each time it feels like torture. But just like we can't blame Kim Kardashian for society's unrealistic beauty standards, it's not Gojo's fault. His only real crime is existing and being careless. A carelessness that comes with being at the top, with never having to think about what it feels like to be without. That's the real issue here, a societal framing problem. If beauty was not treated like a big deal, then having or not having it wouldn't be a big deal. If strength was not so glorified in Jujutsu society, then Gojo wouldn't be that special. And if Gojo weren't that special, Geto wouldn't feel like he had to catch up to anything. And then kids would be assigned missions based on their age, not how much cursed energy they've got. I said all I wanted to say about this chapter and what I found amazing about it, and all the stuff I learned, as well as getting you guys a bit pumped up for what is to come. And if you're planning to watch Hidden Inventory in theatres, I want to encourage you to look at it, trying to make your connections. That to me is at the soul of reading manga. Anyways, please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed this video. Thank you for your time. Have a great day.
Culture team まだまだ買えない複数のベンツラスター